Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott, on Thursday, the 18th of April. It is a beautiful day. I hope you are enjoying the sunshine so far today, wherever you are in the world, and very much hope that it continues over the Easter weekend. So let's get cracking with some of the absolutely fantastic questions that you have, as always, sent in this week. But I'm going to pick up one that came from the live last week, the live Q&A last week, which I didn't have a chance to answer, which came in from Victor Manuel Fernandez Patino, who asked, and he was writing from Mexico, and he asked the following question: do you think it's a good idea for a president to ask other countries to apologize for the invasions of previous centuries? Hello, everyone. John. Hello, Gretchen. Hello from Utah. Thank you very much indeed for signing in. Hi, Alexis. Hello. How was the trip to Athens? Or are you still there? So we've had this question it came in last week on the live Q&A from Victor Manuel, talking about is it right for leaders of nations to apologize for invasions in previous centuries? Now, it's not strictly on the topic of the ancient world, but my thoughts, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as well. Hello, everyone. Hello. My thought would be that while nothing obviously can make up for or change the nature of the past and of the wrongs done by one country to another, or indeed for simply the events taking place to be changed, that whether or not an apology is worthwhile, useful, or important really depends on the state of play between the two nations or groups involved at the present time. What is that apology intended to achieve and act as a building block on which to build on from hopefully, one hopes, to improved relations in the future? What is it seeking to achieve in terms of the current status of relationship between the two countries? I think that is actually the crucial deciding factor, not necessarily the kind of sense that apology might somehow right a wrong done in the past. I don't think we can do that. I think we can acknowledge the wrong done through such an apology, but I think that has to be as a building block and as a step forward towards hopefully achieving better relationships between the groups in the future. So that would be my quick response, Victor Manuel. Thank you very much coming in from Mexico. John McDonough asks, can you do a Q&A on a myotonia dystrophy? I think, John, you're going to have to do that with us, I think. I think indeed. There's no way that I'm going to be able to carry that one forward myself. But thank you very much, Victor Manuel, for tuning in from Mexico, and I hope that goes some way to giving you an answer of what my sense of it would be, although I'd be very interested to hear what yours are as well. Coming back slightly towards the ancient world, we've had a question. Well, actually, a lot of people have been talking, obviously, this week about the fire that's broken out in Notre Dame in Paris. Now, we were all absolutely aghast at the images of this building, this extraordinary building that so many of us have come across and spent time around, in flames, and we were all sitting there with the joys of social media, watching it in live time as the fire was spreading, each wondering about what would and would not be saved. And then the following day we heard the fantastic news that the fire brigade, the Pompiers de Paris, the fire brigades of Paris, over 500 firemen, risking their own lives in many cases, had been able to not only save the majority of the building, but also get many of the sacred relics and treasures out of the building in time to save them, as well as the precious, of course, stained glass windows. Now, what's been interesting over the past week, and in fact I was invited on Good Morning Britain to come on, I think yesterday morning or this morning, talking about how people have reacted to Notre Dame, is people have seen an outpouring of money from billionaires in particular. I think now over €1 billion has been promised to help with the rebuild of Notre Dame. And people are starting to say, well, hang on a second, it is just a building. How can this building have got so much money offered up to it so very quickly when there are many other good causes in the world, not to do with bricks and mortar, to do with humans, where humans are in desperate need of financial help, and yet that money has never been so quickly forthcoming. Hello, Victoria. Thank you so much for joining on your birthday. Happy birthday to Victoria Louise House. How are you doing? That's great. I'm so glad that you're able to join us, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Tell us where you are in the world celebrating. Tell us what you're up to for your birthday. We're talking about Notre Dame and about the reactions to Notre Dame and the burning of Notre Dame, in particular the amount of money that's been promised towards its rebuild. Now, some people have started to say, well, it's just a building, isn't it? Why should we care so much? And I think that's part of one of the problems with the coverage of Notre Dame, and that what I've seen in the TV media versus what has been kind of coming out from different people on Twitter, and particularly from a number of the expert views that have been coming forward on Twitter, is that we have to remember this is not just a building. Principally, of course, for many Catholics of the world, it is an extremely holy place, a very sacred place, which has caught fire in a very Holy Week, in the run-up to Easter week next week. So kind of this is a building with extraordinary significance and meaning. Equally, because of the role that the building has played in its longevity within the Paris landscape, it has been imbued for many French people with incredible amounts of meaning, and it has become, as the President Macron kind of outlined, wrapped up with the very nature of French identity itself. So it is not just a building. I mean, it was Winston Churchill who said, and I think he put it beautifully when he said, "We shape our buildings, and then our buildings shape us." Right? So there is this sense that architecture is not just bricks and mortar that we put in a certain place and then it stays there stable and immobile. It then impacts on us, and we have a continued dialogue with it. It impacts on us, we impact on it, and equally it becomes its bricks and mortar become intertwined with our hopes, our fears, our sense of ourselves, as well as our senses of where we've gone and where we're going in the future. So from that perspective, I think it's very easy to understand why Notre Dame in particular has suddenly seen this outpouring of desire to rebuild, because it is in some sense reflections of us as a community and us as a society. If we were in the UK, what would happen, do you think, if Westminster Abbey caught fire, or if we were in Greece, if the Parthenon kind of started to kind of go backwards from the restoration project that's been working there for the past 20 years. So I think there's always going to be buildings that hit a nerve about ourselves, and as such, if something happens to them, we are always going to react much more strongly. And that isn't to say, of course, that we shouldn't also ask the question, why aren't we thinking in the same terms about other great causes around the world that need sponsorship and need funding? But I think the thing we have to learn is, what is it about these buildings and these moments and these particular events that have sparked that need for us to donate? And then we have to try and work out how we can align some of those other projects with that similar sense that's made us feel that it is so much part of us that we have to open up our hearts, minds and wallets in order to make sure of its survival. So that would be my sense on Notre Dame, but it would be really interesting to get your senses as well as to what people are thinking in terms of the rebuild of Notre Dame. Obviously, some people have, President Macron has pledged that it will be done in 5 years. I think that's optimistic. He's launched an international competition for what the new spire is going to be like. So already that sense that there is going to be a way in which people can contribute to the actual very even look of the bricks and mortar of the future. There will be parts of the building that will be very much obviously of the people of France and indeed of the world, contributing to that rebuild. And we see that in antiquity as well. I mean, Delphi, of course, is a famous sanctuary. Its temple burnt down several times, 6th century, 4th century BCE, and each time there was a massive move to rebuild, and not just to rebuild, but to actually rebuild it bigger and better than ever before, to take the opportunity of destruction to become like a phoenix rising from the ashes in an ever greater or more extraordinary sense. Hello, Bethany, coming back from revision. Here. Hello, Gleese. How are you doing from Brazil? Thank you so much for tuning in from Brazil. So Lee says, should we rebuild the Parthenon back to its original look in 5 years? Well, the restoration project that's been going on for nearly 20 years, kind of on the Parthenon, and may well go on for another 20. Its goal is not to reconstruct the building. Its goal is to restore the building to the level that there is surviving original material at the moment. So they will, for example, if there's part of a column drum create the rest of that column drum to be able to put that column drum back in place. But they are not intending, for an example, to put a roof on the building, because no part of the roofing survives to this day. So it is very much indeed intended to be a restoration of the building as it has survived from antiquity. I think so that the money that is going into that is coming from a whole heap of different sources, and obviously is an extremely important project for the Greek state. So hello, good, Beatrice, hello from Australia on Easter long weekend. Thank you so much indeed that you could tune in. My lord, we're coming in from all over the world. It's great to see you guys, and thank you so much for tuning into the live Q&A with me, Michael Scott. So we've talked about other periods of history and sort of what should we do in terms of modern diplomacy. We've talked about Notre Dame. Let's get back fully into the ancient world here, but again with that reference to the modern. Sarah Scotty has asked this: our UK culture has been greatly enhanced by the influence of immigrants, although there's sadly prejudice against them on an ongoing basis. What were the classical attitudes to immigrants, and did they add to their cultures? Well, this is a really interesting one, isn't it? And people have often looked back into particular the Greek and Roman past, and are continuing to do so in America right now, looking for justifications for all sorts of modern behaviours. And it's really worth having a look. I think I've said this to you before. Have a look at the Pharos website, Pharos, which has been set up in order to document these uses of the ancient Greek and Roman past in order to substantiate it often very outright far-right positions, which we would classify as xenophobic, as racist. And often those are involving a complete misinterpretation or misunderstanding of the ancient sources relating to the Greek and Roman world. But what was the position as far as we understand immigrants? I mean, it changes, obviously, in the Greek world, it changes going from city-state to city-state. In Sparta, you were known as a foreigner, as a xenos, if you came from the next door village, let alone from another part of Greece, or dare I say it, from another part of the Mediterranean or further beyond. Whereas in Athens, while you were Athenian or not, you had Athenian citizenship or not, but then there would be a huge spectrum of ranges of immigrants within the city that had different rights and responsibilities. Now, for some, that meant not a very pleasant experience. Obviously, Athens and even Athenian democracy was built on slavery. The huge slave force, some of the ideas of slave population in Athens, we're talking between 100 and 200,000 slaves to between 30 and 50,000 adult male citizens, something like that, possibly even more slaves. So a huge slave contingent, all of which would be foreigners. There would be immigrants that had been captured in battle or bought in the slave markets and then transported back to Athens. And they, of course, were not having a particularly good time of it in any way, shape or form. On the other hand, of course, even within slavery, there were gradations of slavery. So the worst kind of job as a slave was to be working in the Laurian silver mines underground in absolutely horrible conditions. But if you were an educated slave, you could be a slave teacher within a rich family who would be a pedagogos looking after the children of the family. Hello from Malaysia. How are you doing? Thank you so much indeed that you could tune in. That's absolutely fantastic. So we have that spectrum of slavery. Then on the top of that, you have immigrants that are there as traders. So kind of we know that in 4th century Athens, for example, they allowed spaces for the worship of Egyptian gods like Isis, particular religious space, sacred spaces for the worship of these gods to be set up within the port of Athens, the Piraeus of Athens, so that traders coming from these parts of the world had a place to go and worship their gods while they were in the city. So a sort of, if you like, a permanent place to offer a kind of welcome to people who were there for short periods of time. Then you had people who actually had physical resident status, who were foreigners but had physical resident status within the Athenian state, and these were known as metics. Now, these people never had the right to vote. They were never Athenian citizens, but they did have all sorts of rights and responsibilities within the Athenian state. They had a place in Athenian religious processions like the Parthenon. They had an ability to contribute financially to some of the key elements of the Athenian kind of public purse, if you like, that was then put on things like building of warships, putting on plays, etc. And increasingly over time, Athens sort of opened up its doors to sell off even Athenian citizenship to the richest foreign bidders in order for it to raise cash. Hello, Victoria Manuel from Mexico City. Hopefully you were able to hear the response to your question at the beginning of this Q&A. So you can see there an entire sense and spectrum of places and ways in which immigrants fitted into the Athenian citizen state. Alongside that, the police force of Athens, at least in the 5th century, was a bunch of Scythians, kind of foreign Scythians, that were ran around the city as sort of slaves of the state in a way, but who had the power to actually try and enforce law and order to a certain extent on the citizen body itself. So kind of, again, all sorts of roles played by immigrants. Now, that's not to say that they were always accepted well, that they weren't also subject to prejudice at different times and places. That's certainly the case. So I think the thing we have to take away from this is that the ancient models often provide examples of the entire spectrum of responses to immigrants kind of happening simultaneously within a cityscape. And we should never allow the idea of the ancient, particularly Greek or indeed Roman world, to be used as an example to justify solely one end of that spectrum, as is often being done in the States right now. Thank you, Sarah, for that question. That was absolutely brilliant, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts also as well, everyone. Thank you. From Lagos coming in. Laura, how are you doing? Thank you so much for tuning in. Wow, we are honestly covering the entire globe today. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in to this Q&A with me and Michael Scott. We're going to take a quick break from the questions, but we're coming back to talk about Baia in a minute. Bob Gardner, your question about Baia, the super luxurious resort of den of iniquity on the southern Italian coast down near Pompeii. We're coming back to talk about that in a little bit, but let's take a quick break to talk about some of the things that have been going on in the news. So we've had lots of things shared. Thank you very much for sharing all of these ideas as well. Dropodas has been sharing from Hertz that the 2,600-year-old Jerusalem discovery leaves archaeologists shell-shocked, and it's about chickens. Chickens! Yes, people, chickens. So this is about the domestication of chickens, and what people thought was the case, that really people were only domesticating chickens in this period for the sake of watching them fight. Apparently it was an enjoyable thing to watch chickens fight. But archaeologists analysing garbage in Jerusalem from the late First Temple period have now concluded that, amongst other things, the ancient Jerusalemites ate eggs. So, were chickens just there to watch them fight, or were they actually being domesticated to be eaten? Here's now the kind of a question that's kind of back on the ancient agenda. And Marissa comes from Baia. Okay, we're going to be talking about your hometown when we come back to it in a little bit. Thank you so much indeed for tuning in. And at the same time, someone's already mentioned, I think this today, but did you see on Twitter, I think I posted the link just recently, or else we'll do it this afternoon on the Facebook page, about rabbits. Oh my God, we're getting chickens and rabbits in today. Rabbits. So a rabbit bone has been found at Fishbourne, a Roman villa. Now, it was actually discovered decades ago, but has been in a box and hadn't been recognised as a rabbit bone until it was spotted by kind of a specialist in animal bones, and so they were able to know, this is a rabbit bone. What is this rabbit doing here? Because it had been thought that rabbits were only introduced to the UK by the Normans in the 11th century, but it turns out that at least one rabbit was being kept, probably as a very kind of exotic pet, by the Romans based at the Fishbourne Villa. So this is incredibly exciting. Now, they've tried to sort of time this in with Easter. There's no sense back in the Roman period, before Christianity, of Easter, let's put it this way, but certainly of rabbits being tied in with Easter either. That doesn't happen until, we don't have a written source confirming that kind of correlation between rabbits and Easter until, I think, the 17th century. But there do seem to have been rabbits now in Britain from a much earlier period. So there you go, chickens and rabbits kind of all in the same week. Yes, Sarah, sorry about the noise. Helicopters going by overhead with heat. The windows are open, but hopefully you can still hear me a little bit. So we've had chicken and we've had rabbits. Vindolanda, the season has opened. I hope you've been following their great excavation season and all the finds they've been turfing up so far. So they've just had their first great week. They found their first Roman shoes of the season, of course, a wooden comb, and people have been saying it looks like a lice comb, and given that I've got a small child, I've had my first experience of lice combs myself, and yes, I can agree that I think it looks like a lice comb as well. And from the Severan excavation, a real gem of a find, a finger ring with intaglio. But did you also see, I think we posted this again on my Twitter feed, it's on the Twitter feed, but I think we'll have to move it across to the Facebook page, and that is they also found surviving textile. Right, so that's actually a very rare find for Vindolanda, to find some textile surviving in the mud. Peter, you're from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Thank you so much for tuning in. I haven't been to Tanzania for many years, since 2009, when I was there in Zanzibar for a little bit of time as well. But oh dear, lovely. I suspect the weather is absolutely stonkingly great with you today. Then they got hungry. Victoria says, then they got hungry. I don't know what that relates to. Victoria, tell us. Then they got hungry. Was that about the rabbit? Is that the rabbit bone? That poor rabbit bone. Thank you so much indeed. Something they dug a hole in my garden. Something has dug a hole in your garden to get the metal detector out to test if there's anything there. Well. Who knows what could be found when you start metal detecting around? But remember to declare it. Don't try. And you can all be added in. Anything you find via metal detecting can be added in the UK to the Portable Antiquities database, which is really important for people for researchers trying to keep track of all the amazing finds that are found across the UK. From BBC News, Stonehenge, someone has mentioned this on the feed already, talking about the DNA reveals the origin of builders, and this links into Sarah's question, thinking about immigrants coming across. So the ancestors of the people who built Stonehenge travelled west across the Mediterranean before reaching Britain, a study has shown. So they've been looking at DNA extracted from Neolithic human remains, and the Neolithic inhabitants were descended from populations originating over in Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, that had moved to Iberia, Spain, before heading north, and they reached Britain in about 4000 BCE. So we'll put the link for that on the Facebook page as well. Absolutely extraordinary as we get a sense of the connected nature of our world, going back to kind of donkey's years before we even normally think about globalized communities. But we are, as ever, constantly discovering, I think, quite how much we owe to and the impact of movement and migration of peoples across the world throughout our human story, kind of thing. So that is absolutely really, really crucial to remember. A couple of other remarks. So on BBC iPlayer, there's a ton of stuff that I've been doing over the years, if you want to catch up with any of it at the moment. Sicily, my Sicily series is on iPlayer for another 5 days. Italy's Invisible Cities, which is Florence, Naples and Venice, that's on iPlayer, as well as Athens, Istanbul and Cairo. They're all on the iPlayer at the moment, so do get a chance to catch up. And I would also really recommend this lecture, which is in Oxford, is going to come up in November time, so the 14th of November, 5 p.m. This is by Dr. Llewellyn Morgan, who a kind of long time ago, I was there being taught by a Latin summer school, so man, very close to my heart. He's going to be talking about on Heracles' track to the Indus, and that will be, again, thinking about the connected ancient world. He's going to be giving the 2019 Gandhara Connections lecture, and this is one of the Oxford research projects on the art of Gandhara, the art of a particular area surrounding the Punjab, that was subject to and took advantage of and incorporated so many different influences coming in from all over the ancient world in the 1st century CE. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. So do, if you can, get to see Llewellyn's lecture on the 14th of November. And then, of course, coming up from November through to May 2020, there's going to be the Tutankhamun Treasures of the Golden Pharaoh exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery in London. So do, and that was shared by Alison Risley. Thank you so much for sharing for that. Thank you. Make sure you've got your tickets for that. What am I doing over the next couple of weeks? Well, if you get a chance, of course, Buckingham History Festival weekend after Easter, on Saturday the 27th, I'm talking at Buckingham History Festival about connected ancient worlds, and then after that I'm doing a research seminar at the Open University in mid-May, thinking about the ancient Greek religious experience. But before then, I'm also doing a Warwick in London talk on May 9th, thinking about the ancient Greek world on TV. So all the details on the Facebook page. Do come along and say hello. Finally, I have to share this. We talked about it a little bit. Mary Beard shared this, we were chatting about it on Twitter a little bit. Simon Cowell believing that his home is haunted by the ghost of the male lover of the Roman Emperor Hadrian Antinous, who actually died in Egypt. So who knows why Simon has decided that this is something that he feels so strongly about, and why Antinous has decided to haunt Simon of all places, of all people, in all places over here in the UK, which is a place we don't think Antinous really ever set foot. Who knows? But there we go. Stranger things have happened. In fact, I've been looking back into this a little bit as part of follow-up from my unknowability conference that I was at in New York. We're producing the written text, and I'm looking at what got people so interested in the Delphic Oracle, particularly in the 1880s and 1890s, and in particular stories about the Oracle, that she was perhaps involved with some kind of psychic or telepathic powers. And it's because at that time in Victorian Britain, or partly because there was a massive interest in the occult. So Queen Victoria attended a seance, and in 1882, I think it was, the Society for Psychical Research was set up by massively important academic and literary figures, people like Lewis Carroll, Alfred Tennyson, E.R. Dodds, Eric Dodds, who was the Regent Professor of Greek, was a later president of the Society, and actually wrote an article in 1946 looking at the ancient Delphic Oracle as an example of telepathy happening in antiquity, as in order to make the case that telepathy could still happen in the then early 20th century. So who knows? Who knows? Simon Cowell, you really could be onto something. So we've got a little bit of time left for a couple of questions, and I did want to get on to Bob. I promised you Baia. Bob Gardner has been visiting Baia and has been sharing some great pictures on the Facebook page, so thank you so much for that, Bob. But what you didn't go down underwater. Of course, this is one of the great things about Baia. It has Italy's first underwater archaeological park that you can explore either in a glass-bottom boat, or if you're a scuba diver, you can get in and do some scuba diving there, as we did in Italy's Invisible Cities Naples program. So catch up with that on iPlayer. We uncovered one of the best experiences of my life. We uncovered a mosaic of a beautiful Roman villa that is now underwater. Now, part of the ancient city and settlement of Baia is now underwater, not because water levels so much have risen, but because the land there, on top of a massive volcanic chamber underground, the land actually rises and falls as that chamber fills up and unfills of magma. So it's like a massive giant breathing in and breathing out, and currently we're in an era when the land has fallen, so it's gone down below sea level, what in Roman times was actually above sea level. And these would have been the villas that you can now see underwater in Baia, were the kind of luxurious seawater view villas of the Roman era. Now, Baia really was the luxury byword of the southern Italian coast. This was where the ultra-rich Romans had their villas and went to party and enjoy themselves. So from about the end of the Republican period, we know Julius Caesar had a villa there. This place started becoming the place to have your second home, to get away from the politics of Rome, but to talk and gossip amongst all your elite political peers out in Baia while enjoying obviously some beautiful views, obviously some good food, and it turns out also a huge amount of debauchery, because the other reputation for Baia in antiquity wasn't just a place of luxury villas. You could also go there, of course, to take part in the fantastic systems of baths that were there, that were being fed by the geothermal heat coming up from this very volcanic region. We explore the baths in Invisible Cities, Naples, but also for the debauchery, because on the one hand, someone like Horace says there's nothing in the world to compare to splendid Baia. But on the other hand, Propertius, the love poet of ancient Rome, talks about corrupt Baia and pleads with his girlfriend in these poems not to go to Baia because you will come back changed, no longer a chaste, wonderful lady, but a lady of the night. He calls Baia, you crime against love. There was no love in Baia, there was only sex. So there we go. Okay. Thanks, the Pornhub of ancient fun times. There we go. Thank you so much indeed for that comparison. That one will stick in my mind for a little bit. Thank you all so much indeed. Kind of that gives you a little bit of a sense of Baia, I hope, and give you something to think about over the Easter weekend. We've got some other great questions, but we haven't got any more time, I'm afraid, to get to them this week. We'll keep them on the list for next week, and of course, do keep sending in your questions. You can do so via email, michaelscottacademic@gmail.com, or direct to the Facebook page, facebook.com/michaelscottacademic. Do please keep sharing your photos of amazing locations and ancient sites that you visit around the world. Keep sharing your stories also of fantastic teachers that have inspired you in the classics over your careers. We're going to be collecting some of those and showcasing them in a couple of weeks. Have a fantastic Easter weekend if you're celebrating Easter, and I look forward to seeing you all next week, Thursday the 25th of April, 4 p.m. usual time, to catch up on our next instalment. Have a great weekend and take care of yourselves. Take care. Bye-bye.